All right, before we begin, I have an amendment that I have to make. I went through the video last week, and as I was doing some editing, I found a couple of comments that I need to clarify because they were confusing. I've mentioned this on more than one occasion, that what I'm trying to do is give you a broad overview of all of the councils, kind of like the God's eye, the satellite view. So in that attempt, what I usually try to do is I try to focus on the one thing that I think presents the core of what the council, no, you can leave that on. What the council.
I can hear you now.
Oh, really? Man.
Is that good?
Well, I've never heard anybody ever complain about my big mouth, so. That reminds me, one day I was teaching, I'm sorry, this is part of the problem, right here. I was teaching Sunday school in a Presbyterian church for seniors, and I mean seniors, 65, 70 and up. So I had been teaching a couple of, sorry Rose, I've been teaching a couple of weeks, and there was a new teacher coming in. And they turned around and they said, "Oh, where's Paul?" I wasn't ordained at the time, and he said, "Well, we're rotating the teachers." And they said, "No, we got to bring him back because we can't hear this guy." But anyway. So what winds up happening is, as I'm trying to present the material and I try to focus on one thing, I get what you just saw, my ADHD moment, and it's like, oh, then there's something over here.
Squirrel.
Exactly, and that happened twice last week. The first time was, I was talking about Pulcheria, okay, Marcion's wife, Theodosius' sister, right?
Yeah.
And when I mentioned her, I said, does anybody know what her name means? Now, in my head, I have, and this is part of the problem of doing this, I have essentially the semantic range of definitions floating around in my head. And if I don't write down on a piece of paper which definition is applicable to the context, I have all of them floating around in my head, rattling around between my ears. And what happened was, when I asked the definition, I said, does anybody know what Pulcheria means? Pulcheria means at least three different things. Her name means, number one, noble or weighty. Now you see where I screwed up.
Yeah.
It also means beautiful. Thank you, Nancy, because she correctly used the primary definition of the word. I was using kind of a semantic similarity to noble, weighty, and I have to apologize to her if I see her in heaven. I don't mean that you're fat, sorry. Anyway, that's how that came about. I was thinking noble, and it actually technically correct, but more accurately would have been Nancy. Secondly, at the end, if you'll remember, we talked at the very beginning about the 5 C's, the 5 patriarchies, right? We said there's Rome, which for all intents and purposes represents the entire Latin Church, all of the West. But then we have Constantinople, Jerusalem, we have Alexandria, and we have Antioch. Well, at the end, Carol asked, well, when you're talking about the Oriental churches, which Oriental church did you mention? Was it Antioch or, well, as we look at all of the churches, we can see that there are factions, there are little split-offs from all of the churches. Antioch had the problem with Paul of Samosata, so there was this little faction of Paul, and this is what I was thinking of when Carol asked the question. None of the answers that I gave were correct. I mean, not precise enough. They were confusing. I mentioned Antioch, and that's kind of right, but not really. The church that you wanted to hear was the Armenian Orthodox Church. Okay, that's the one. So as I was looking at the tape last week and editing it, I was like, no.
That's what I thought.
That's not right. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that. The second thing is, I've said on more than one occasion, I truly hope that as we go through this, it stimulates your interest in the church. It stimulates your interest in these councils. Because there's so much more to each of these councils that I cannot present to you. And what I'm going to do is, in an effort to, again, kind of tweak you to see if I can get you interested, I want to give you a brief, very brief picture of what you're missing by what I'm doing. And I admit I can't cover all of it, but I want to give you some sense as to how interesting these councils are. As we know, the church was persecuted for the first 400 years. Now, the persecution went through various levels of intensity. You know, Dacian, Diocletian, Domitian, those guys were nuts. They were just killing anybody in sight. Valerian, Marcus Aurelius, they were, a little okay. Then there were some emperors that were just, don't bother me, I don't care. But for the most part, the persecution occurred. Along comes Constantine. We've got the Edict of Milan in 313. So by the early 4th century, now we see that the church is being recognized. Constantine then, he wants the bishops to call the Council of Nicaea. Now I want you to think for one moment, 400 years of persecution. Bishops are now showing up at the Council of Nicaea. What do you think the picture of these 318 bishops presented when Constantine walked into that chamber in May? You're talking about men that had been tortured, that had been beaten. And here's the emperor of the Roman Empire looking in the faces of the men that his empire had brutalized. Now I'm just going to mention 3, but there are more. There was Saint Paphnutius, all right? You don't have to copy the name, but his name is Saint Paphnutius, and he was of Thebes. He's an Egyptian bishop. And he had his eyes gouged out, and he had the muscles in his legs permanently severed. There was St. Paul of Nea Caesarea, Turkey for the most part, and he had both of his hands crippled permanently, and they were burned with hot irons. And then there was St. Potamon, probably the easiest name, the second easiest name of all of them, of Heraclea, again, Egypt. And he had one of his eyes gouged out in torture. And at the beginning of the council, after Constantine called the council to order, he came down from his imperial throne and he walked over to each of the bishops that had the visible scars, and there were, 318 bishops, there were a lot more than the 3 I just made. And he kissed the limbs and the sockets of their empty eye sockets to honor them. Now this is some of the stuff that I can't spend a lot of time presenting to you, but I hope it kind of wells up that interest in seeing what these men went through to get to Nicaea and then beyond. Although there was still persecution, as we saw last week, but this time it wasn't from the empire per se. All right?
If I had had my eyes gouged out and the muscles in my legs severed, I would have said, forget about it, I'm staying home.
Well, that would have been the Italian bishop. Do you,
It's because I
I
said
like the
forget
little
about
rumbling of humor. Yes, oh, I got that one. Okay, yeah. Now I caught up with it. Does anybody want to know what the main Oriental churches are? There are many, but there are 6 primary ones. Are you interested in what they are? If you're not, I'll just pass. I'll move on.
I looked it up. I wanted to know.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll mention them if you're interested. First is the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. Okay. Then there's the Syriac Orthodox Church of Antioch. Then there's the Armenian Apostolic Church. There's the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Tewahedo. Tewahedo. Love that word. Anybody know what it means? It means, it's not an area. Because when I first heard this years ago, it was like, where in the world is Tewahedo? Is that off the Bahamas or something? It means one or unified. Which, if you think about the context, Miaphysitism, or if we're being pejorative, monophysitism, that makes sense. There's also the Eritrean, Eritrean, Orthodox Church, the Tewahedo, again, sounds more like an Indian term than anything else. And then there's the Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church. So those are the 6 primary ones. Obviously there are more. And as our brother and sister here will tell you, they're still around. Oriental churches are still around. As a matter of fact, has there been any movement recently in the meeting that happened between the East and the Oriental? I know that they've met.
Just talking.
Just talking. Okay, so there hasn't been any. I didn't think there would be. 1,500 years of separation. It's not going to happen overnight. Anyway. Okay. The Council of Chalcedon. Due to the impact of the Robber Synod and Dioscorus's relationship with the Emperor Theodosius II, and bringing to bear the power and authority of the imperial court, the Eastern Church essentially was cowed. And they looked to the West at this point for help. This is not the first time we've seen this. We saw Celestine talking to Cyril, and Cyril, St. Cyril represented Celestine in the Council of Constantinople. So this is not new, but it did happen. So Pope Leo, who reigned as Pope from 449 to 461, so he lived 10 years after this council, and he was representing the entire Western Church, all of the Western churches. He protested the Robber Council, the Robber Synod, and he did it in numerous letters, especially since they deposed him. Okay, I'm not happy with that. So, combined with the controversy caused by the Robber Synod, and then the appeal to the West for assistance, Leo wisely, some would say shrewdly, used this confusing state of affairs to vastly improve and to enhance the authority of the Roman Papal See. Now again, we've seen this previously, where the East appeals to the West. I just mentioned it, where Celestine spoke to Cyril, had Cyril be his representative, and when Cyril spoke at the council, deferred to the emperor, the bishop of Rome. The emperor of Rome. Anyway, so Leo, for his credit, wrote and acted with dignity, energy, circumspection, and skill, and with an almost perfect mastery of the theological question and controversy. And he demonstrated what one historian called, and I'm quoting, the greatest mind and character of his age, and by far the most distinguished pope of the ancient church. And that is not a Roman historian that said that. Okay? So he was respected highly. And Leo urged for the calling of a new council in the West, but unfortunately, he urged for the new council in the West, and he wanted it to be in free and Orthodox Italy. Hey, paisan, come va? So, Leo makes his request. Unfortunately, however, due to the ravages and the uneasiness in the West caused by one Attila the Hun, Leo advised that there would be a postponement and he possibly hoped that a council could be avoided, and that if the bishops read his Epistula Dogmatica, his dogmatic epistle, and agreed, we could circumvent the whole thing and just put to rest this matter. Well, that didn't happen, much to Leo's chagrin. Now, the year after the Robber Synod, in 450 AD, Theodosius II dies. You want to talk about an ignominious death? He died because he fell off his horse. The emperor dies because he went on a jaunt over the countryside and he fell off his horse. Now, his death brought about the doctrinal revolt, which unfortunately so often occurred in the East. And having no son of his own, his distinguished general, as we saw last week, Marcion, became his successor, in large part because of his marriage to Theodosius' older sister, Nancy?
Grace.
Pulcheria.
Pulcheria.
And Theodosius...
Everybody,
Oh,
Pulcheria.
Korea.
Yes, Potpourri, yeah. Theodosius II's death now marks a significant turn in the theological controversy with Dioscorus and the Miaphysite Monophysite party, because Marcion, it's hard to say that without saying Marcion, Marcion favored Pope Leo. And he sided with the Deiphysitists, the two natures. And it was then Marcion, through his imperial power, in May of 451, called a general council in his own name and that of Pope Leo. And the remains at this point of Flavian, remember he was beaten so badly at the Robber Synod that he subsequently died from his injuries. His remains were honorably interred, and a number of the bishops, a number of the more prominent bishops that were deposed, were reinstated. Now I'm going to read to you the edict. I have notes from the council, and I want to read them to you. But this was the edict that Marcion, you don't have to write this down, but this was the edict that Marcion sent out in May. That which concerns the true faith and the Orthodox religion must be preferred to all other things. For the favor of God to us ensures also the prosperity of our empire. Note that phrase. Inasmuch now as doubts have arisen concerning the true faith, as appears from the letters of Leo, the most holy Archbishop of Rome, we have determined that a holy council must be convened at Nicaea in Bithynia, in order that by the consent of all the truth may be tested and the true faith dispassionately and more explicitly declared, that in time to come no doubt, no division may have place concerning it. Therefore, let your holiness, with a convenient number of wise and orthodox bishops from among your suffragans, repair to Nicaea on the 1st of September ensuing. So 6 months he wants this council. We ourselves also, unless hindered by wars, will attend in person the venerable synod. That's the second thing you should note. So what do you see with those two statements already? You see what? You see the emperor throwing around his weight, and then you see the tacit threat. I'm gonna be there watching. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna jump ahead, but I'm just gonna tell you. When the synod was called, they set up a screen in the center of the church, and I'll get to the church, the name of the church in a minute, because it's glorious. They set up a center section, and they screened off the altar behind them. And on the right was all of the Orthodox bishops, everybody, plus the Roman legates, etc. And on the left were all of the Miaphysites, all the Monophysites, including Dioscorus. And in the middle sits the representatives of the imperial court. Talk about imposing. All right. So, the call goes out. Leo really wasn't thrilled with the time or the location, but he relented. And he sends 2 of his bishops and a priest. He sends Pascanasus and Licentius, and then he sends the priest Boniface as his representatives. So, in conjunction with the Western legates that were already in Constantinople, this represented the Roman contingent, the Western church, where, okay? Where
Oh, no.
Pascanasus, wow, acted in Leo's name as Leo's representative. It was one of the few times in the early church where the West actually had influence and control of the internal workings of a synod, of a council. Mostly it was the East that was controlling the councils up to this point. Now the East had control of the external, as we saw. The imperial court just plopped itself right in the middle of the council. So, the bishops assembled in Nicaea. I have to read a quote here when I finish this. But the bishops assembled in Nicaea in September. They met the call in September of 451. But due to their, quote, turbulent conduct, caused the venue to be moved to Chalcedon, opposite Constantinople. Has anybody actually gone and looked up the geographical relationship between Chalcedon and Constantinople? No. Okay. It was moved to Chalcedon in the hope that being in view of the imperial court and the Senate, and being that both might attend at any moment, it would give the bishops pause as far as the possibility of another outbreak of violence as we saw in the robber synod. So they move it to Chalcedon, near Constantinople, and basically they're saying, Daddy's watching, so you better straighten up. And see if I can find it. I thought I had marked the quote. But basically what wound up happening, the behavior of the bishops was so bad, that the imperial court had to remind them, guys, you're supposed to be dignified men. You need to stop doing this. So, they meet in Chalcedon, in the church of Saint Euphemia. Sounds Italian, but it's not. Euphemia. Anybody knows what Euphemia means? We get the concept of
Yes.
Euphemism.
we get the concept of euphemism from them, but that's not what the word means. What the word means is speaking words of good omen. Can you imagine a church with that name? Speaking words of good omen, and how appropriate that the Council of Chalcedon is meeting in that church with that name. And Saint Euphemia, the church, sits on a hill with a commanding view of the Bosphorus. Only 1,200 paces. 1,200 paces from the Bosphorus. Basically, half a mile to 0.8 kilometers. It was that close. Imagine the setting, how spectacular that must have been to have this church on this hill overlooking that strait at this time. Remarkable. The Fourth Ecumenical Council opens. It convened in October on the 8th, and it concluded on the 1st of November. So it went for, roughly 4 weeks. And it represents a pivotal moment in the history of early Christianity, marking both the continuation and a culmination of the theological debates that had long characterized the nascent church. Now, it is here in the Council of Chalcedon where the two elements of the early church would forever cast a long shadow over Christianity, over the church. The political and the theological, as always. So we begin where the council opens, and from the beginning, the council was tumultuous. Men just can't play well together. I want you to listen. The theological fanaticism of the two parties broke out at times in a full blaze, till laymen present were compelled to remind the bishops of their clerical dignity. When Theodoret of Cyrus was introduced to the council, he was greeted by the Orientals with enthusiasm. Yay. The Egyptians, on the other hand, said, "Cast out the Jew, the enemy of God, the blasphemer of Christ." The others retorted with equal passion, "Cast out the murderer, Dioscorus, who is there that knows not his crimes." In other words, who doesn't know what this moron did? So that was the opening of the council. Let's look at the political just for a second, because it'll be brief. The political influence of Chalcedon it's really problematic. It occurred during a period characterized by numerous socio-political upheavals, including the decline of the Roman. This is a misstatement. I don't know who the historian was that said this. He says the decline of the Roman Empire. More accurately, it would have been the decline of the Western Roman Empire, because when the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths came down from the north and took over Rome, the Eastern Empire functioned for another 1,000 years. So this is a historically lazy statement. And this political period gave rise to numerous theological factions. The decisions made at Chalcedon were not simply theological affirmations, but they were also reactions to the political realities of a fragmented empire, in which religious divisions could lead to civil discord, which we've already seen. As such, the council's resolutions aimed to provide a stabilizing doctrinal foundation in a time of uncertainty, reflecting then the interplay between faith and politics in the early church. We've already seen this, and we've seen the incremental influence. Constantine, hi, I just want to take a peek. Theodosius I, you need to do this. And now we see Theodosius II basically saying, oh no, I side with these guys. So we see this development. The relationship between the church and the state underwent a transformative shift at Chalcedon. Prior to this, the church had often been subject to the whims of the imperial authority, with emperors wielding significant influence over ecclesiastical matters, and I've just mentioned a couple of them. We saw Constantine, and then we had Theodosius I, then Theodosius II, culminating in what we've just seen with Marcion standing up and saying, I'm tired of you bishops, I am going to do it now. So this sets the stage now for the interplay of church and politics. And when we look at the Council of Chalcedon, which does impact this relationship, we'll get to the point later on where we will see that it is it's a two-edged sword as to what happens here at Chalcedon. But the fact of the matter is that this interplay, which became much more pronounced, ultimately leads to what we see happening in the Middle Ages. And what we see being identified, we see the name, the Holy Roman Empire. So it created a bit of tension and difficulties, but we'll get to that in a minute. Theologically, the council gathered the greatest number of bishops of any early ecumenical council to date. Everybody remember how many? Oh, I just said it. Remember how many bishops were at Nicaea? I just mentioned it.
313.
318. Anybody remember what happened at Constantinople? Remember? I said half, 150. In Chalcedon, and depending upon the historian who's doing the identifying of the clergy and how they're identifying priests or bishops, 520 bishops showed up at Chalcedon. Now here's the thing. Of the 520 bishops, 2 were from Africa. And depending upon how you count the Western legates, between 6 and 10 came from the West. So of the 520, and some historians say that there were actually 600, but of the 520, 508 were from either the Greek or the Oriental churches. It was a predominantly Eastern council. The assembly was summoned in response, obviously, to the growing needs of the Christological controversies, particularly stemming from the teachings of Eutychus and, of course, Miaphysitism or Monophysitism and Dioscorus, and the assertions regarding the nature of Christ. The goal was to establish a unified doctrine that could resolve, always the best intentions, the existing disputes and provide a clear articulation of the nature of Christ as both fully divine and fully human. The theological implications of Chalcedon are, without question, profound, constituting a significant milestone in the development of Christian doctrine. When I look at the first 4 ecumenical councils, and this is just the way I look at them, I look at Nicaea and Chalcedon as bookends. These are the 2 most significant, most prominent, most authoritative councils. Nicaea sets the standard. We get extrapolations and challenges after Nicaea, and then resulting in Ephesus, and then Constantinople, the other way around, Constantinople and then Ephesus, and then we have Chalcedon, which we will see encompasses all of what took place prior. In my estimation, and I speak now as a theologian and a philosopher, not a historian, but from a theological, philosophical standpoint, Chalcedon is the most important ecumenical council of the first 1,500 years of the church. Okay? And we see other ecumenical councils, none of them had this. The closest thing that we get, and I don't even think the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, which defines all of the medieval Roman dogma, I don't even think that is as significant as Chalcedon. The closest we get is Trent during the Reformation, which most people don't know was an ecumenical council. The East was invited, and they basically said, go pound sand. And Protestants were invited, and they were muzzled. They weren't allowed to speak. But technically, it was an ecumenical council. And that's why I say Chalcedon, bar none, is probably the most important council. And let me say this, just as an aside. Whenever you deal with Rome, you have to deal with Trent, period. Rome has not moved beyond Trent. There's no argument. The First Vatican Council was an affirmation of Trent, except they include, papal infallibility, which everybody goes, eh? The Second Vatican Council, which all traditional Tridentine Roman Catholics bemoan, changed how many substantive dogmas of the Roman Church? What substantive Roman dogma was changed at the Second Vatican Council? Zero. Not a one. Not a one. They changed peripheral issues. Oh, yeah, the Mass will be in Latin. Oh, you guys can have guitars now. You know what it's like being a kid going from Latin and you're sitting there going, and then all of a sudden the next week it's like, what?
I can understand.
I know what this guy's saying. I'm not sure I like what this guy's saying, but I know what this guy's saying. And then they bring out the guitars. You know, I actually heard Let It Be played in church. I'm serious. I heard Let It Be played in a Roman church. It was at that point I thought, hey, this might not be that bad. I wonder if they'll play Black Sabbath next week. The point being,
Would you like to see?
from Trent to Vatican II to the modern Catholic catechism that was released in the 2000s, every single pronouncement supports or endorses Tridentine theology. So if you ever really want to know what Rome teaches, just go get the Catechism of the Council of Trent. It's in English, tell you everything you want to know. Anyway, that was my nickel freebie for you. The council produced the Chalcedonian definition, which you have in your hands. And I handed that out to you for a reason. We are going to look at that in a minute. And it is a doctrinal statement that articulated the two natures of Christ, divine and human, united in one person, without confusion, change, division, separation. Okay? Those four elements. Amongst other things, but this is the Chalcedonian definition. And it not only served to clarify the church's understanding of Christ, but to affirm, note this, the legitimacy of previous ecumenical councils, such as Nicaea and Constantinople. And in doing so, it sought to provide a theological framework that could withstand the challenge posed by various heretical interpretations and to affirm the centrality of Christ's dual nature for the Christian faith. And we sit here and we think, yay, they came to a conclusion. And then we hear William Lane Craig basically say, I am a neo-Apollinarian. I'm going to just skip over everybody and say, well, Chalcedon was in error, they went too far. I want you to think about the hubris and the arrogance of that statement. Now, he asserts that he did it to stimulate discussion. Hi, I'm going to come to church on Sunday naked, just to stimulate discussion. I mean, there are certain statements.
Or laughter.
I'm on camera. Do you want me to respond? Okay. One of the things you'll learn as R.C. Sproul taught me this 30 years ago, you never argue with the man with the mic, because I will always have the last word, because I can always edit out your comment. But anyway, I will let you have that one for free. That's a freebie. But anyway, but you see the point. Why make such a stupid statement? If you want to write about this, if you want to challenge this, then you better have a substantial argument, because you've got 1,500 years of the church against you. 1,500 years. One of my professors once made the statement, and it's been repeated by a number of different people. If you come to a passage of Scripture or a doctrine or a theological position that no one in the church has articulated for 2,000 years or has been deemed a heresy, you might want to take a step back and reevaluate your position. And yet here we are, after Chalcedon does this for us, resolves the issue it was facing contextually in history, and we got somebody that thinks they're smarter than the church. The decision at Chalcedon set the stage for comprehensive theological orthodoxy that would influence future councils and doctrinal discussions, solidifying the foundation upon which later Christian theology would stand. Think about that, how important that is in the history of the church. What this one council meant to us today. Imagine walking out of here and saying, at St. Peter's we established a theological position that for 1,000 years is going to be referenced by the church. That's pretty powerful. And under theology, there was also another implication of the Chalcedonian decrees, and that is the ecclesiastical implications. And we've seen this come up too, as well. It had far-reaching implications for the structure of ecclesiastical authority within the church. By asserting its jurisdiction, the council, conciliar jurisdiction, the importance of a conciliar approach to theological disputes, not that the others did not also recognize this, but now you've got over 500 bishops saying the same thing. Chalcedon established a precedent for the assembly of bishops as the ultimate arbiters of Christian doctrine. And now you should understand, this should put in your mind why you hear, especially in the East, but why you hear the statement, no bishop, no church. Right here. Right here. This sets the stage for ecclesiastical authority. This is why those of us that are high church look at the evangelical community and they say, guys, you got it all wrong. You don't have the right to open up a Bible and create a church. Private interpretation is your right. You have the right to read God's word. You are commanded to read God's word. You are required to read God's word. You are to put on the full armor of God. You are to stand against the wiles of the devil, but you don't have the right to demand to create your own church. That is not the authority given to you by Peter. which if you think about it from the standpoint of the extremes, how the evangelicals could even come up with the fact that Peter, the first pope, he wasn't, but one of the representatives of the apostolic see writes a book to the elect and says, oh, by the way, you don't have to listen to us. You can just create whatever you want. You know, hey, you got private interpretation. Open the Bible, you see a passage. You start the First Baptist Church of Bithynia. That's not what was established here. Now, I'm mocking the situation, but sometimes that's the only thing you can do. It's like, when are you going to read church history? Anyway, so this marked a significant shift towards more centralized ecclesiastical authority, emphasizing the role of councils in governance and the formulation of doctrine. And again, if you understand the heritage, remember, even though we have separated ourselves from Judaism, and by this point the break was irrevocable, the entire foundation of what we believe and from where we came from an understanding of Judaism, came from the trifold office. It came from what Paul passed on to the Gentile churches. It morphed, it adopted, it was modified to meet non-Jews, which we saw the beginning at the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15. Didn't come to fruition until after the 3rd century. But the point is, there is heritage, there is connection, and even though by this point they may have kind of massaged it a little bit, they still understood the basic root. Even if it was just a fleeting thought in the back of their skulls, they understood from whence they came. The acceptance of the Chalcedonian definition by the vast majority of bishops signified not only a theological consensus, but also a collective assertion, here you go, of ecclesiastical authority and unity that transcended regional boundaries, if for only a limited period of time. But it still presented it was as if they presented the standard. This is what we should be, and we should all adhere to this. So in light of the significance of Chalcedon, which extended beyond its immediate theological concerns, there's a reflection of the growing power dynamic within the church and the increasing involvement of imperial authority in ecclesiastical matters. So we're back to that. And the broader historical context of Chalcedon simply cannot be overlooked, because the legacy is twofold. It established a crucial doctrinal position regarding Christology, while simultaneously asserting a mode or model of ecclesiastical governance that would shape the church's trajectory in centuries to come. And the issue became particularly pronounced in the early church as various interpretations of Christ's nature emerged, prompting theological controversies that would reverberate for centuries. Okay? Now, at the heart of the Council of Chalcedon's discussions, obviously, was the articulation of what it had become to known as the dual nature of Christ, his full humanity and full deity. And the Chalcedonian definition, or sometimes called the Chalcedonian Creed, is a crucial outcome of the council, and it affirms Jesus in two natures, two physes, miaphysitism, monophysitism, two physes, and stated united without confusion, change, separation, or division. The formula sought to safeguard the integrity of both natures in Christ, rejecting any theological articulation that would diminish one in favor of the other. The implications of this definition were profound as it sought to balance the integrity of the divine nature, the Logos, while equally affirming a full and real reality of Christ's humanity. Now, prior to Chalcedon, the church battled, you know what, I'm going to skip that because I want to use that to kind of test you guys. But there was a resolution to various debates that simply did not settle the Christological discourse at the time, and it laid the groundwork for further unfortunate reflection and ecclesiastical governance that was required because of constant battles. Just so that you know, as important as Chalcedon is, and that's why I said for the first 1,500 years, the same issue that Chalcedon addressed comes up again, and it comes up during the Reformation. The same questions. So Socinianism arises. Now, we're not going to get to that. But the sin of man can never allow their ego to be subjected to the authorities placed above them. Just can't. The affirmation of Chalcedon became crucial for what would be considered, and this is key, orthodoxy. This is considered Orthodox Christianity. Think about that in terms of anybody that, whether knowingly or unknowingly, deviates from this. If this is Orthodox Christianity and you deviate from this, what are you doing? You're rejecting Christianity, or at least orthodoxy. So, this conclusion enabled the significant developments in all theology, liturgy, and ecclesiastical authority. The council articulated a clear framework that would serve as a reference point for all future ecumenical discussions and theological positions, and influencing the work of many notable theologians, not the least of which was Leo the Great, and the later development of the Western Church's Christology. Furthermore, the Chalcedonian definition fundamentally reconfigured the relationship between Christology and soteriology. This formulation changed the manner in which people understood at the time the relationship between Christology and salvation by insisting, note, that only one who is fully God and fully man could mediate between God and man. Right? The impact of the council has reverberated beyond the ecclesiastical context into the broader historical and cultural dimensions. The conflicts that ensued from the council's decisions played a pivotal role in shaping the trajectory of Christian thought and its community identity, with subsequent denominations emerging around differing interpretations of Chalcedonian standards. The differences created by adherence to or rejection of, and when I read that, it still boggles my mind to reject Chalcedon, but I wasn't there.
Now, it's the next council where they battled between truly and fully. Or were truly God, truly man.
That was 200 years ago.
I thought you said that the council of 553 was where they battled truly, not fully.
Oh, okay, all right. That, you're talking about the verbal.
Yeah.
All right, that'll be the fifth ecumenical council.
Oh, okay.
All right. What was I reading? Where am I? All right, anyway, the division created by the adherence or rejection of, there it is, contributed to the fracturing of the early church, affecting relationships among various factions, including the Eastern and Western churches, to say nothing of the battles the Eastern church wound up having to face. Hence, Chalcedon stands as a critical juncture in the history for many, 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 many reasons, synthesizing much of the theological discourse up to that point. And that's also a critical element. The fact that here in the one council we're dealing with virtually everything that transpired before it. If Nicaea set the standard and was the first one, it was the icebreaker, if you will, going into the Antarctic. Council of Chalcedon is the summation of all of them up to this point. And the assertion of the council's authority is among the most significant consequences and deliberations. One of the most amazing elements of Chalcedon was borrowed from Nicaea. Do you remember what happened at the Council of after the Council of Nicaea was concluded? They developed the creed, and then what did they do once they developed the creed?
It was propagated, it was promulgated.
But it happened right at the end, and we talked about it. They completed the creed, and then what did they do right at the end of Nicaea? What did they do? It has to do with the creed. What did they do? Huh?
They wrote Amen.
They all recited it.
There it is. They stood up and read the creed, and everyone had to say amen. They had
Amen.
to subscribe to it. The same thing happens in Chalcedon. They required everyone present, and this is why the Oriental said, and left. They required everybody to subscribe. They required that it be read prior to the commencement of each conciliar proceedings. Imagine going through history having to begin every proceeding reading the Nicene Creed and then the Chalcedonian Creed. This declaration came with a clear delineation of the ecclesiastical roles, reinforcing the primacy of bishops, and at this point, especially the Bishop of Rome. Because remember, it was to Rome the appeal was made. And they appealed to Rome in matters of doctrine and discipline. So by elevating the status of the council as a definitive arbiter of theological controversy, it inherently shifted the locus of authority within the church. Bishops who adhered to the Chalcedonian decrees claimed a certain primacy of legitimacy. And that positioned them above everybody who rejected it. And it effectively contributed to the consolidation of ecclesiastical authority around the decisions the councils were making, while diminishing the influence of dissenting groups. And it also, in emphasizing ecclesiastical authority, established a precedent for the church's autonomy in theological matters. So even though the imperial court was heavily involved, when it came to the final decisions, when the yeas and the nays were counted, it was, in reference to theological matters, it was the bishops that made that decision. And it continued to navigate the complex dynamics of the church-state relationship. The endorsement of the council's conclusions by emperors, such as Marcion, indicated a developing symbiosis wherein the state recognized the importance of ecclesiastical unity for public order and social stability. The state recognizes the impact of the church on society and culture. All we have to do is take half a step back and look at where we are today. With the marginalization of the church and the rejection of the church's influence in the state, the moral power of the church to critique the societal behaviors leads to the degeneracy that we see today. You remove the church and her moral voice, and chaos ensues. The relationship originally characterized, the relationship between church and state was originally characterized by mutual inherent respect. Yet it was fraught with tension, and it laid the groundwork for the future problems that we saw later. Now, I'm going to stop right there. Basically, what I have left is a summary. I want you to look at this, okay? I want to close with us looking at this. I'm going to read a couple of other things here as I close. I'm going to close the council with actual citations from the council. But before I get to that, I want you to look at this. And I want, this is the Chalcedonian Creed. This comes from the council. Therefore, following the Holy Fathers. So now we have historical, theological endorsement. We stand on the shoulders of those before us. We all with one accord teach men to acknowledge the one and the same Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Now I want you to look at these statements, and I want you to tell me, based upon what we've discussed in the past, I don't know how many weeks, what Chalcedon is addressing. At once, complete in Godhead and complete in manhood, truly God and truly man, consisting also of a reasonable soul and body. I'm going to stop right there. And you two be quiet. Give them a chance. What are we talking about? Think back. Which heresies do you think this would? I just kind of alluded to it when I talked to a modern theologian. I'm talking about modern theologian. At once complete in godhood, complete in manhood, truly God and truly man, consisting also of a reasonable soul and body. Does Apollinarianism sound familiar? All right, so there's the first heresy. Not necessarily the first in historical chronology, but the first heresy. Of one substance with the Father as regards his Godhead, and at the same time of one substance with us as regards his manhood. What is that addressing? Come on, guys.
Gnosticism?
A form of Gnosticism. You're on the right track. What was the heresy that was specifically addressed that manifests Gnosticism? You're right there, Laurel. You're right there. Arianism? Right? All right. Like us in all respects, apart from sin, as regards his Godhead, begotten of the Father before the ages, but as yet his manhood, begotten for us men and for our salvation, of Mary, the Virgin, the God-bearer. Okay, since Father Mike said it, what are we talking about now? We're talking about those that denied the Theotokos, right? All right. And one and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, recognized in two natures, without confusion, without change. So who is that addressing? You only have to think to last week. It wasn't that far. Go ahead, Taylor. Yeah, either the
Yeah.
Miaphysitism or the Monophysite heresy. Okay? Without separation or division. This is the one everybody loves to talk about. That was the week before. Nestorianism. So, just in that element, and then it goes on, and the rest of the creed simply enhances and reinforces what you've just said. But in that section of the creed, they hit the four major heresies that arose. Not the only one, but these are the four major heresies that the church had to face. And Chalcedon wraps it all up in what probably, if you broke it up, was maybe 2 paragraphs. I mean, that's some serious brain power going on. Okay? And let me read the conclusion of the council. The council condemned the robber synod. It annulled all of its decisions. That wasn't me. The martyr Flavian was declared orthodox. Dioscorus of Alexandria, Juvenal of Jerusalem, and other chiefs of Eutychianism were deposed. The Orientals, now this is this is where we get into the precision and the necessity of clarity of language. The Orientals, when they heard these decisions, Flavian, restored, orthodox. Dioscorus, this is what the Orientals shouted. Many years to the Senate. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal God, have mercy upon us. Many years to the emperor. The impious, or impious, must always be overthrown. Dioscorus, the murderer of Flavian, Christ has deposed. This is a righteous judgment, a righteous Senate, and a righteous council. Now you see why we say that even though decisions had been made, confusion still abounds, because these are the people that supported Dioscorus. And yet, they're endorsing, at least initially, the decisions of the council while condemning the guy that they say they supported. Now, we can sit there and tease it out and say, well, they may have said at the end that Dioscorus was more Monophysite, and they rejected the Monophysite. They didn't accept the definition of Miaphysitism that was imposed upon them, and we can go through all of these linguistic challenges. But here it is. The Oriental Church is aligned with Dioscorus, and now they're condemning it. Dioscorus, our friend, was in the next session, 3 times cited in vain to defend himself against the various charges of, notice what he's charged with: avarice, injustice, adultery, and then Article 189, anything else we can find that we want to charge you with. Other vices divested of all spiritual, and he was divested of all spiritual functions. While 5 other bishops were deposed, they acknowledged their error, and because they repented, they were admitted back in. The Donatists would have had a fit. Now at the second session, 2 days later, on the 10th, Dioscorus was already removed. He's gone. The Niceo-Constantinopolitan symbol, which I'm assuming was the creed, 2 letters of Cyril, but not Cyril's anathemas, and Leo's dogmatic epistle were read before the council. We're standing for orthodoxy, and we're going to read all of the orthodox statements before the council, and you have to subscribe. The bishops exclaiming, the bishops. That is the faith of the fathers. That is the faith of the apostles. So we all believe. So the Orthodox believe. Anathema to him who believes otherwise. Through Leo, Peter has spoken. So even did Cyril teach. That is the true faith. And then at the fifth and most important session on the 22nd, they read this. After the public reading of the confession, all the bishops exclaimed, mind you, this was read publicly now. All the bishops said, this is the faith of the fathers. This is the faith of the apostles. This we all agree. Thus we all think.